Hello and welcome to WorldCanvass from International Programs at the University of Iowa. I'm Joan Kerr and we're here in the Senate Chamber of the Old Capitol Museum tonight to talk about film, the last century of film in the public sphere. So I'm so glad you can be here to join us. Here to walk us through the past century's evolution in the art of filmmaking, obviously in rather broad strokes, and help us understand what's meant when we talk about the public sphere are two guests from the University of Iowa's Department of Cinema and Comparative Literature. Next to me is Professor and Head of Film Studies, Steve Ungar. Thanks for being here, Steve. And next to him is Assistant Professor Steve Choe. Hey, Steve, thank you for being here. Great. So, moving pictures or films of one sort or another have been with us for more than a century. For many of us, films are an essential part of our own personal stories. We relate important moments in our lives to films we've seen, and obviously the influence of filmmaking on cultural discourse can hardly be denied. So I think I'm going to turn first to Steve and ask you, Steve Ungar that is, and ask you if you could give us some context for the development of film and filmmaking over these last 100 years. What were the early efforts like, and was it always a sure thing that films would be a big hit with the public?
Well, the prime feature of early cinema is the novelty of the illusion of movement. How can you generate movement on screen? And when people saw first films, which were often minimally moving, they were of people walking along city streets, or a famous one, a train coming into a station in southern France, or of rooftops in a Berlin neighborhood. These were projected larger than life. And one story is in 1895, when the train entering the station in southern France was shown at a cafe in Paris. People recoiled because they felt the train was going to come off the screen. After the screening, they went behind to see if there was a hole and that there had been a train behind. So it was the novelty. And it was also the scale of these images that were larger than life. So the novelty and the notion of a cinema of attractions drew interest. Cinema was almost magic. People were not accustomed to this. So novelty is the first way in which a public was engaged. But very soon, the recording of movement moved toward reportage, the notion of photojournalism, where filming movement in the streets could be used to inform people of all kinds of events, political events, accidents, everyday events. And people went to be both entertained and informed. At a certain point, there were other kinds of uses for this new technology, such as taking people, so to speak, to other parts of the world they had never seen. These could be on the outskirts of cities, they could be in Alaska, they could be in Asia. So it was an extension of the illustrated travelogue journal that worked. At a certain point, the ability to tell stories through moving pictures became more and more profitable. And it seems as though the fiction film, the storytelling capability of this technology dominated the kinds of films that were originally a case to record something out in the real world. So where people generally go to the movies, film scholars will talk about fiction film or documentary film. They'll talk about what film is. I think the kind of interest I want to follow up with you is what film can do. Film can entertain, film can instruct, and for my interest, film can make people think, and through thought, change the way they live in the world. In some instances where there was censorship related to these kinds of phenomena, film became subversive activity. It became an expression of resistance to injustices. And so this is a public sphere in which film can have an impact. As technology has advanced and making films became easier through the use of portable recording equipment, both sound and visual, more and more people could make films. Through video and now digital arts, almost anyone can attempt to make what we would call a film or a video. And this ability of film to engage contemporary life is what I see as the essence of what interests me in saying film is more than entertainment. Film can be entertainment plus, film can be reportage plus. And it's not just what we call documentary films, films in the real world that have this effect. I can think of very successful narrative films that change people's opinions, that reinforce their sense of belonging. I think of Gone with the Wind as an American epic, or the silent version of Abel Gance's Napoleon, which becomes a reference for people to identify from one generation to another. And that's, for me, a range of film in the public spheres.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Napoleon. It's a wonderful 4-hour-long film from what, the 1920s, I guess? Or
1927 or 8, and using 3 screens.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And thinking about that, and then these little short films, videos that people are making these days. What is it, do you think? You've already talked about the magic of film and how it impressed people, certainly in those early days. But all of us now have, most of us in this room anyway, will have some version of it, some kind of equipment that will take either still photographs or moving pictures. We can make little videos on our phones now. So people are kind of jaded in a way about technology, but they still go to the movies. They don't just rely on what they can do themselves. Why is that? What's the magic in this genre?
Well,
Sure.
I mean, just to follow up on Steve, one of the things that took place in the early years was, as Steve mentioned, the narrativization of film, the idea that film could tell stories. And this was not necessarily a natural thing. The techniques for putting pieces of footage together, for cross-cutting, for the function of close-up, these things had to be developed. And by the early teens, mid-teens or so, these techniques were in place. So let's say our everyday notion of film that we have today and the way in which it excites us and enthralls us is one that had to be discovered, that had to be developed, techniques had to be developed. So these are the same techniques that are utilized to make YouTube videos, to tell stories in other kinds of moving image media. So I think one of the ways in which film, let's say the quote-unquote old-fashioned experience of sitting in a theater before a big screen with a mass of strangers, that one of the reasons why that experience is still has some kind of magic associated with it is these techniques live on. They've stayed with us over the years. So the magic, the experience of movement, which was in those early years, in a certain sense, domesticated and utilized and directed towards certain purposes. That magic of movement, there's still remnants of that.
Well, and then there are the pictures, but then there's all the other stuff that comes along with it. Most movies have some sort of soundtrack, some sort of audio element, and then there's the communal experience of, at least in the old days, sitting in the theater, or now you can sit in your home either alone or with a group of friends and watch these films. What difference do you think it makes to the experience of the film to be either with others or by oneself?
I still remember when going to films was fairly unique. You would go, I remember a professor of mine, we would go to the movies, my wife and I, and he would often have gone to the program before. And so as we would be going in, he would be coming back and he'd give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. That was a certain kind of unique experience, but you went because the film was showing for a week or 2 weeks. You went because it was programmed with another film. In part, you would go with the expectation that this was something special that you couldn't have at home. And so it was going out as people in earlier generations would go to the theater or go to music. And even now, the technology keeps reconfiguring. So what we've talked about as magic, which is really technology and artistry and intent, it stays the same. I'm thinking of the screenings at the Ungar Theater of silent movies on DVDs with live accompaniments. And that means that the screening itself is a unique event. And I think even though people tend to watch movies at home more and more, that there is still the sense of a shared experience. It's not, we used magic in the beginning because people weren't, as you said, jaded or accustomed to the technology, but there's something about the image and the scale of the image and the kinds of ways in which this technology can make you see, hear, and feel in ways that can change you, move you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the functions that scholars speak about in relation to early narrative film is the way in which it trains the senses. It trains people how to see and hear in modern life. And it gives them a way, we think of seeing and hearing as almost natural, phenomenon. It just appears to you. But there's a certain way in which cinema was part of a whole range of technologies that, in a way, prepared the individual for experience and how to, navigate a city street, for example, or how to deal with others, other strangers. There's a way in which the cinematic narrative trained and kind of allowed perception and affects and emotions to be to expect certain experiences in the world. So it's inseparable from this modern experience.
What do you think, if you think about a theater piece that's performed in front of a live audience, and every day's performance is unique because it's being done live, you compare that to an experience like the one Steve just mentioned, where the same film is being shown, but you have live music being performed and you've got a different audience. What's the difference between those two experiences, theater and film?
Well, in the experience of being a spectator, it's a live experience. And even though you may see a film that you claim in a very everyday sense, you already know you've seen this film. I'd like to think that every time you see a film, it changes, and you change, and you see things that you didn't see before. What we haven't talked about yet in this context of what film can do has to do with the people who make films, the people who conceive of films, the people who actually go and produce them, and they often produce them in a team. It's very difficult to do this all on your own. And so there again, it is the project of using this technology, using an intention that you have, and realizing it, actually making it. For films that we're going to be talking about later in the session today, people go out into communities. They go somewhere else. They go on location. And that's what interests me about getting people into the world through film so that it changes them. Those changes also occur in fiction films. But right now, I'm very interested in films that will take spectators out into the world and change what they know about the world through the experience they have.
Another maybe difference between the theatrical live experience and the cinematic one is that the cinematic one allows a public to be formed of private individuals. That's to say that, you mentioned these other ways of distributing and watching films within private context, but we're all in a way watching this product that is the same across different homes, even though one person has a more home theater 5.1 or something versus an old TV. It forms a kind of public through the reproducibility of the image, and that's different than the event, let's say, of a theatrical performance, which involves other unexpected or unforeseen factors as well.
What were some of the big advances or big turning point moments in this last 100 years for filmmaking?
Certainly, the transition from so-called silent film to so-called sound movies was a major change. I say so-called silent films because the silent film experience included sound elements and accompaniment and in the performative aspects of the film experience. Moving from black and white into color, various kinds of technologies was another major change. For some people, each of these changes signaled the end of cinema or of film as we know it. And yet for others, evolving with these new technologies was a new challenge and enriched, broadened the practice. There was also, in the late 1940s and 50s, there was the advent of widescreen, the advent of advanced color techniques. There were experiments with three-dimensional films. There was even smell-o-vision, where people tried to add aroma so you could smell certain kinds. So there were experimentations that were more successful, more felicitous than others.
Yeah, and these are technologies, important developments that have helped to immerse the viewer in a total experience. And I think we can all remember when we first saw that great, or had that great experience, whatever film it may be. And these developments have all contributed to the idea of telling a compelling story.
Well, and, everyone who has, even people who haven't seen Jaws, know that theme. If it pops up somewhere in someone's life, that this is, the shark is approaching moment, or the psycho stabbing moment. These are things that are part of popular culture. I mean, you don't need to even explain them anymore because somehow or other they struck a chord. People remembered them, were taken by them, and what accounts for that, Steve?
Accounts for
Why does that happen? Why do we remember these things as we do?
Because they become part of a shared sense. We can say public culture, but we can say mass culture.
Yeah.
There's something that even if we don't know it, we know about it. It becomes a common experience. But I think talking about film as part of mass culture is one side. I'm more interested as well in individuals who have the idea that making a film is taking a risk of various kinds. They can be financial risks, they can be time risks, they can be risks involving censorship, depending on the context. And so, in addition to products that we go to see, Hollywood product being sold, I'm interested in films where individuals put themselves on the line through efforts and where they get involved in the world, whether it's the present or the past, through the projects that they make. There are various ways to talk about this. We can talk about an essay film, we can talk about a political film, we can talk about a film that brings people to understand something that's going on that they would not have known otherwise. And that's a side of film that I think has to be seen alongside the big, popular, blockbuster phenomenon we go to at the mall.
Yeah, I think the idea of risk is an important one. Maybe one reason why those scenes that you mentioned are so thrilling is because they put the viewer in a place of risk, or they experience danger of some sort, whether that be the very famous theme from Jaws, or the radical montage of Psycho. I mean, these are techniques that film artists have deployed, and commercial filmmaking will appropriate them in certain ways and use them to put the viewer in a position of risk, and of course bring them back to a position of safety. And this experience somehow is seen as a thrilling one.
Yeah. Well, you both teach film here at the university, and obviously spent your lives immersed in this art. Steve, I'll ask you first. What has been the most meaningful thing that you think you can transmit to students as they begin to think about film in your classes?
If film allows spectators a new way to see and hear and feel and understand the immediacy of experience through this medium, I'd like to think that they can carry that sense of understanding and sensitivity out into their experience in the real world, to look at the details, to understand dialogue, to see things in ways that film technology can allow them to see and then go out in the world and do that. That's what I want to give to them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also, I think there's the idea of a temporary public sphere that's formed through a shared experience of film that's also important. It enables conversation with strangers that's, that you don't know, but you know that they've seen the same images, they've had the same experience, I guess, as you. And so that somehow forges camaraderie of some sort, a community of some sort, even if it's temporary. So.
And some films have, it seems to me, really sort of changed perhaps the national mindset, or really at least expanded the dialogue. If you think of something like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and for those who haven't seen the film, there's a white family, prosperous, liberal white family, and the young woman in the family brings home her date, with whom she's very serious, and he's a black man, and challenges all of the personal concerns of the parents, and I know that became, I think, a very important point in American culture when this film came out. Certainly, there are lots and lots of others. Would either of you want to mention a film that you think said something really important at just the right time that caused a national dialogue, either here or some international film?
Well, this happens at various levels. I can think of a film like Philadelphia, which brought out questions that people had wanted to talk about, perhaps didn't talk about. I can think of Thelma and Louise. I'm taking popular films to show how popular films can raise issues in this particular way.
I was thinking 12 Years a Slave, and a film like this, the depiction of slavery is so violent and so brutal. I think there's a kind of timing, a readiness of, let's say, American audiences for a film like this, maybe it's a film that raises questions and reflects private ideas, private concerns, and makes them public. So it's an important work.
Yeah. Well, and then there are films that we know of, Leni Riefenstahl films that glorify the early period of the Nazis and the incredible outdoor amphitheater events and whatnot. Obviously, film being used there in a propagandistic way, and thrilling audiences and the faithful and whatnot. And so, yeah, it's a compelling genre. You expect film to be with us for a long time?
I hope so.
I hope so too. Yeah. And what do you think comes next, Steve?
I would, a film like 12 Years a Slave, I would personally like to see more films that raise these kinds of ethical and moral questions, and do the kind of challenging that the great films have done in the last 100 years, the challenging of ideologies and certain beliefs that we just accept as natural, as unthought. And I would like to see films continue to do this.
Well, thank you so much, Steve Ungar and Steve Choe, for being with us for this first segment. As you know, this is a 4-part series on the century of film, and we'll be discussing film with 2 young professors and also filmmakers here in this next segment as well. I'm Joan Kerr, and this is WorldCanvass from International Programs. This programming is available on YouTube, iTunes, UITV, and the International Programs website, international.uiowa.edu. So for tonight, thank you very much, and please join us next